The sky was calm. That was the first thing people remembered later, how calm the sky was. Not a storm. Not a warning. Just the fading light of a May evening, the smell of cut grass drifting across the airfield, and somewhere above the New Jersey tree line, a shape so enormous it seemed to belong to a different world entirely. People had driven hours to see it land. Families spread blankets on the grass. Journalists held notebooks. A radio announcer adjusted his microphone and smiled. Nobody was afraid. That's the part that stays with you. To understand what happened on that field in Lakehurst, you have to understand what the airship meant to the people who built it, flew it, and believed in it. This was 1937. The word, impossible, was being revised constantly. Only 34 years had passed since two brothers from Ohio first lifted off a beach in North Carolina for 12 seconds. 12 seconds. And now human beings were crossing the Atlantic Ocean in floating palaces 100 feet taller than the Statue of Liberty. The LZ-129 Hindenburg was not just a machine. It was an argument. A declaration that Germany, emerging from the humiliation of Versailles, from economic collapse, from years of national despair, was capable of producing something the world had never seen. She was 804 feet long. Nearly the length of 3 football fields. Inside her aluminum skeleton, 16 enormous gas cells stretched from bow to stern, holding over 7 million cubic feet of hydrogen. She was driven by 4 Daimler-Benz diesel engines, each one capable of 1,200 horsepower. She cruised at 85 miles an hour, and she did it in silence compared to an airplane, a low hum above the clouds while passengers drank wine in a pressurized lounge and watched the Atlantic drift beneath them. The walls of that lounge were decorated with maps of the world's air routes. Not the routes that existed. The routes that would exist. The designers were already imagining the future. Passengers on the Hindenburg slept in cabins with real mattresses. They ate 4-course meals prepared by trained chefs. They looked out observation windows at the curvature of the Earth. A crossing that took a steamship 5 days took the Hindenburg less than 3. For the people aboard, businessmen, diplomats, families, tourists, it felt less like travel and more like arriving somewhere new inside themselves. Between 1936 and 1937, the Hindenburg made 17 successful crossings of the North Atlantic. 17. She carried 1,002 passengers without a single fatality. Her commanders were experienced, careful men. Her crew took pride in her the way sailors once took pride in clipper ships, not just mechanically, but personally. She was theirs. On the evening of May 3, 1937, she departed Frankfurt carrying 36 passengers and 61 crew. Among them were families returning home to America, a German journalist filing dispatches, a young steward on only his second transatlantic flight. The passenger manifest read like an ordinary cross-section of a world in motion, ordinary people going ordinary places, trusting in the machine above them the way we now trust in engines we cannot see from our seats. The crossing itself was uneventful. Headwinds delayed her schedule. She arrived over New England a day late, then traced the coastline south toward New Jersey, over Boston, over Manhattan, low enough that New Yorkers looked up from the streets to watch her pass. At Lakehurst Naval Air Station, the ground crew was ready. Reporters had gathered. Herb Morrison, a 31-year-old broadcaster from Chicago, stood near the mooring mast with a recording engineer and a Presto disc recorder. He'd been sent by WLS radio to capture the landing for a later broadcast, something routine, something ceremonial. He'd done this kind of thing before. He wasn't nervous. The Hindenburg descended through low cloud, her belly facing the field, her mooring lines dropping toward the ground crew's hands. Everything proceeded normally. Then it didn't. At 7:25 in the evening, a small flame appeared near the aft section of the ship. Not an explosion. Not a fireball. A small flame, blue and pale at first, like a pilot light catching. Some witnesses said it flickered. Some said it crawled. It did not stay small for long. The hydrogen ignited. Not all at once, but fast enough that within seconds, the entire rear of the ship was alight. The aluminum frame began to fail. The tail dropped toward the ground. 13 million cubic feet of atmosphere suddenly had to accommodate something that should never have been there. Herb Morrison kept talking. He didn't stop. His voice rose, cracked, came apart at the seams. "It's bursting into flames," he said. And then something more broken. "Oh, the humanity." That phrase has been pulled apart and analyzed for 80 years. It sounds theatrical now. But listen to the recording, the way his voice fractures on that word, humanity, and you realize he wasn't performing. He was watching people fall out of the sky. The Hindenburg dropped in 37 seconds. 37 seconds from the first flicker of flame to the hull hitting the ground. The nose remained elevated as the tail fell, a slow, terrible tilt, like a building collapsing in stages. Passengers at the windows watched the ground rise toward them. Some jumped. One man hung from a window frame until the ship fell low enough and then dropped, stood up, and walked away. Others were not so fortunate. The ground crew, the men whose job was to catch the mooring lines, ran. Some ran toward the ship. 13 of them died. The airfield, which moments before had been a place of anticipation and camera flashes and children pointing at the sky, became a field of flame and smoke and people calling out names. 14 passengers died. Among them, a 14-year-old cabin boy, his first crossing. A businessman from New York who had made the flight many times and considered it safer than driving. A woman who had leaned out a window to wave at the crowd below. What is remarkable, and it is remarkable, is that 62 of the 97 people aboard survived. Some walked out of the wreckage with burns on their hands and faces. Some were pulled from beneath the hull by the ground crew who had turned around and gone back. Survival, that evening, had a great deal to do with where you were standing inside a burning machine in the 37 seconds you had left. The wreck burned through the night. By morning, only the skeleton remained, blackened aluminum ribs catching the light, the structural geometry of the ship still visible even in ruin. Photographers walked through it. You've seen those images, probably. That lattice of curved metal against an open sky. The absence of everything that made it what it was. The passengers who survived were taken to hospitals in nearby towns. Some were treated for burns, others for smoke inhalation, a few for broken bones from the jump to the ground. They gave statements in quiet voices. They struggled to explain what 37 seconds felt like from the inside. Several said they didn't understand what was happening until they were already on the ground. The event was too fast for narrative while it was occurring. Only afterward did it become a story. In Germany, the news arrived to a government already skilled at managing information. The Nazi regime had invested heavily in the Hindenburg as a symbol, her flights often trailed swastika banners, and Joseph Goebbels understood the propaganda value of a German machine gliding silently over foreign cities. The disaster required careful handling. Official statements emphasized the investigation, suggested sabotage, avoided the word hydrogen. In America, the footage and recordings spread immediately. Morrison's voice, which had not even been intended for live broadcast, was aired the following day and became one of the most recognized audio recordings of the 20th century. For millions of Americans, it was the first time they heard a news event unfold in real time, not read, not described after the fact, but caught in the act of happening. The confusion, the emotion, the journalist losing his professional composure, it was something genuinely new. The investigation concluded that the cause was likely a discharge of static electricity that ignited a hydrogen leak near the aft gas cells. Whether that static came from the storm-charged atmosphere, from the mooring lines themselves, or from something else entirely has been debated by engineers ever since. A later hypothesis suggested the outer fabric coating, treated with chemicals similar to those used in rocket fuel, may have ignited first. The exact mechanism remains, technically, unresolved. What was not unresolved was what the disaster meant for the future of airship travel. The Hindenburg was not the last large rigid airship. But she was effectively the last one anyone trusted. The Graf Zeppelin II, her sister ship, flew a few more times and was scrapped in 1940 for aluminum to build warplanes. The American airship program, which had already lost the USS Akron and the USS Macon in separate disasters, quietly dissolved. The era of the great airships, which had lasted barely 2 decades, was over. What replaced it was the airplane. Already faster, already improving, already carrying mail and then passengers across shorter routes, the airplane didn't need the Hindenburg to fail in order to succeed. But the failure gave the airplane a certain clarity of purpose. If you wanted to cross an ocean quickly and safely, there was now only one real answer. The irony is that the Hindenburg's operators had repeatedly requested helium from the United States, helium being non-flammable, the obvious alternative to hydrogen. The US held a near monopoly on global helium reserves and refused to export it to Nazi Germany under the Helium Control Act of 1927. The diplomatic calculation was correct in its suspicion of German intentions. The practical consequence was that a ship designed for helium flew on hydrogen, and on the evening of May 6, 1937, that difference measured 37 seconds. History rarely offers clean lessons. It offers this kind of thing instead: decisions made for reasonable reasons, circumstances converging in unexpected configurations, people caught in the gap between what was intended and what occurred. Wonder is not a mistake. It's what gets us airborne in the first place. We just owe it to the people who failed to remember that every great machine carries, somewhere inside it, the particular conditions of its own failure, and that the work of building a better world is not the elimination of risk, but the patient, difficult, unglamorous work of understanding exactly where we are still guessing. 37 seconds. In 37 seconds the world learns something it hasn't entirely finished learning yet. If stories like this matter to you, if history is more than dates and headlines, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. There are more moments like this still waiting to be understood.